Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Fiona Murray. I'm Visitor Partnerships Manager at Forestry and Land Scotland, and I am your MC for today. Well, for the next hour and a half, anyway. So today we're here to look at the current and future trends of e-bikes, particularly e-mountain bikes. I've been involved in this right from the start when in 2019, a few months before COVID struck, a bunch of cycling organisations and some of GB's largest land managers met to discuss this growing topic of e-bikes. We realised how much we still didn't know about it. And subsequently commissioned Edinburgh Napier University to carry out a study on the use of off-road e-bikes, particularly electric mountain bikes. This research focused on current and future trends, as well as the opportunities and challenges presented by this exciting growth industry topic. It was managed by British Cycling and supported by the organisations whose logos are on the slide here, along with Welsh Cycling, Scottish Cycling through Developing Mountain Biking Scotland, Scottish Forestry and Nature Scot. And it aims to help the sector better understand the habits and the user habits, the technical developments and support decision making into the future. I want to stress it is a GB-wide piece of research, and it included looking at the market, the trail design, future decisions, sustainability, responsibility and behaviour change. And today's webinar is going to share some of these findings. Next slide, please, Kerry. Thanks. So a few housekeeping things. Please mute your mic and turn off your camera to help with bandwidth. I know that's particularly relevant in some places. Hopefully I'm not going to disappear off, but some people I know have got slightly dodgy broadband at times. This is being recorded, so it will be available made available online after we're finished. If you don't want to appear on screen, please just keep your camera turned off. If you've got any questions, we do have quite a lot of time for Q&A afterwards. So if you've got any comments or questions, please put them in the chat function, which certainly on my Teams is up at the top of my screen. I dare say you know where it is on your screen. If you would like to turn on the live captions, if you hit the three dots at the top and select turn on live captions, Elizabeth and Kerry are available if there's any technical issues, but hopefully it should work swimmingly. Next slide, please, Kerry. So today's agenda, the future directions and trends for off-road e-mountain bike use and impact in Great Britain. We've got three guest speakers. We've got Dan Cooke, who is now National Cycle Infrastructure Manager for Forestry England, but up till about 2.5 weeks ago was at British Cycling. So it was in his previous incarnation that he was looking after this study on behalf of the whole group. We've got Lesley Ingram-Sills, who is a lecturer from Edinburgh Napier University. And we've also got Tracy Mosely, who is Trek and Bosch e-bike ambassador and a very, very successful mountain biker. I'm sure lots of you will have heard of. And after they've told us a lot about the study, we've got time for Q&A. Now, I've never actually been at this end of it before. I've been the one sometimes putting in the questions. So we have been reassuring the guys that this is a really great group of people and there'll be lots of really great questions. And, you know, we're all in this together. It's a friendly bunch of people. So please do shove your questions in the chat, and Elizabeth and I will try and collate them and hopefully get a chance to call on people to actually ask them in person, or if you're not comfortable with that, we can read them out ourselves. So I'm just going to hand over now to Dan and Lesley. Kerry, if you could do that. Thank you very much, and I'll catch up with you at the end.
Brilliant, thanks. Good morning, everyone. I should be way better at this by now after teaching online for 2 years, but please bear with me while I do just share the slide deck. Hopefully everyone can see that nice and clear. So thanks very much for inviting us along today. As Fiona really well introduced there, we're going to give you a sort of overview of some of the key findings. This was a very big study, it had very big aims. So we're going to try and give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour of some of the findings so far, but there will be bigger reports available beyond this time. So the study was obviously to look at the future directions and trends of off-road cycling and e-mountain bike use and the impact in Great Britain. At Edinburgh Napier University, we worked with the stakeholders in order to be able to deliver this. I just have to make sure at this point, it wasn't just me by myself, but we have quite a big team at Edinburgh Napier University. So Dr. Lewis Kirkwoods, Dr. Tom Campbell and Professor Grant Florida James also were helping out within this study. And we had a number of stakeholders, again, as Fiona introduced, who came around. Dan, I don't know if you want to add anything in on top of that.
Just thanks, Lesley, and great to be here, folks. Just as Fiona and Lesley have intimated so far, there's a substantial number of land managers and governing bodies that were really interested in finding out what the implications were of e-mountain bikes, and again, you know, this COVID notwithstanding has been around for quite a while now. 2019 were the initial discussions. Yeah, lots of people interested in this and lots of implications. So the study's been amazingly insightful as a result. Thanks, Lesley.
Brilliant, thanks, Dan. Okay, so we will just get started. So I guess the easiest place to start today is to actually just define what an e-bike is, legally, what that looks like in GB. And an e-bike contains an electric motor that only functions during the action of pedalling. And I think that's one of the key things that we need to remember when we're referring to e-bikes and the difference of e-bikes and e-scooters. They are limited to a power output of 250 watts and a speed limit of 15.5 miles per hour. And above that speed, the motor switches off and the rider no longer has that assist available to them. They are legal to ride in the UK on all cycle paths and other areas that pedal bikes are permitted. And in terms of why this research was conducted, we knew that e-mountain bikes have the ability to enable riders to access the countryside of Great Britain, providing an alternative to the built-up environments and busy traffic that we often see on the roads that surround it. However, what the stakeholders understood was that actually we know very little about the behaviour of e-mountain bike riders in that space and any impact on fragile and trail environments. Therefore, the current stakeholders were really keen to explore, slides are moving around. They were really keen to explore a few different things in terms of the study. They would like to have known what happened in terms of the growth and the direction of the market. They were also really interested to know in terms of what was happening with trails and trail design, and was there any impact associated with this. They were also interested in understanding whether land managers, owners and stakeholders would be able to use any of this data to future assist education and decisions and policy relating to e-mountain bike uses in both a responsible and sustainable way. And they were also really interested just to understand the rider, the population. What do they want? What do they want in terms of where they're riding, their behaviour? What are they looking for? Is there anything that's missing? Because it is quite a new discipline. So what we did in terms of the university, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the research process. I won't bore you too long with this, but we broke this project into three main pillars. So the first part of that was we conducted a review of the literature, so what is currently known and published out there in the literature, and I will go on to discuss each of these pillars in more detail in the next few slides. We then conducted some focus groups, again, to understand what was happening on the ground at sites, within the e-mountain bike sector. And then from that, we developed an online questionnaire. So as all good academics, we started off in the books. We can't help ourselves. And we kept our search really wide when we looked at this. And we actually ended up returning around 5,000 articles and supplementary information around e-bikes, not specifically e-mountain bikes. And from that, we narrowed that down with a search criteria to about 96 articles of relevance. And what that told us, a few different things. So we understood that an extra million people started cycling during the pandemic, and that was accompanied by a 57% rise in children cycling. In 22 to 23, it was predicted that more than 130 million e-bikes will be sold globally. And e-bike sales accounted for a fifth of the total spend in the UK. We also found from the literature that e-bikes may have the ability to attract a more diverse range of cyclists. They have the ability to reduce barriers of fitness, or maybe some of the barriers associated with the terrain and topography that are commonly associated with mountain biking, that can enable riders to cycle on routes of greater distances with a reduced physical output. However, what's really important is, even though that physical output is reduced, what we're seeing from the literature is that is still enough in order to be able to ensure that individuals get health benefits from that. E-bikes may also be able to reduce inclusivity and diversity issues associated with ageing populations, helping to keep this population more socially engaged and physically active for a longer period of time. When we looked at how e-bikes are used in different countries, we found it was reported that e-bike use varies in countries with low number of cycling trips. So we're talking about countries like Australia, the USA and the UK here. And in those countries, male riders predominate in terms of the individuals who are using e-bikes. Whereas in countries where cycling trips are high, so the Netherlands, Germany and Denmark, it was reported that there's a greater number of females actually cycling on these bikes. So quite nice to see some of that data coming back. However, what we were really interested with this study is e-mountain bike use, so not just general e-bike, and a lot of those studies focus on the commuter in that space. And what we found was there was no research published out there on e-mountain bike riders. So then that was great for us. We knew that we wanted to really understand what was happening within this population. So we started that off by conducting some focus groups. So within the focus groups, we had 48 participants, and we ran 14 focus groups in total, and they were conducted between the 5th to the 30th of July in 2021. And we split the focus groups into two main areas. So we wanted to, first of all, understand the user, so who is actually cycling on these bikes. And there was a few different categories that we were interested in finding within that. So e-mountain bike curious individuals, those who had never cycled on them before, but were actually interested in joining and participating in this sport. We looked at new members, so those who are recently new to the sport or maybe using it in terms of a family setting. We also conducted a focus group with expert riders, so those who have been doing it for a longer period of time and may even have been racing, and also those with disabilities and chronic health conditions. The other arm to that, we were really interested in looking at the industry and what the industry were doing within this space. And again, we broke that down into four main categories. So we conducted a focus group with the manufacturers to understand what their goals were in this space, with the trail builders to try and get a bit of an understanding in terms of what's happening on the ground, with landowners and land managers to understand what they were seeing, and also with service providers, so some bike shops and coaching within that. And from this research, we conducted what is called a thematic analysis, where we get all of the transcripts. It was lots of hours of sifting through different things, and we start to build that into themes that are happening. And from there, we got 6 main themes that came up, and those main themes surrounded participation, the industry landscape, trail design and operation, the environment, behaviour and education. And from those 6 main themes, we actually had some sub-themes associated with them also. We then used those themes in order to be able to develop an online questionnaire so that we could get more participants, so we could get, again, a greater understanding of who was actually using e-mountain bikes within GB. And the data from the questionnaire, we got 1,341 valid responses from that. And then we started to be able to get quite a good demographic of who's actually using these bikes. In terms of the split, 68% of respondents were from England, 22% from Scotland and 10% from Wales. So we did get a nice breakdown of all of the countries. In terms of gender, what we found was that the majority of individuals who were cycling e-mountain bikes were male at 79%, females were 20% and other 1%. In terms of the experience, so how long the individuals had been mountain biking for, e-mountain bike experienced users came out at 78%. However, really interestingly, there were 22% of the respondents, which equated for about 295 individuals, were e-mountain bike curious. So they hadn't even ever got on an e-mountain bike before, but they were curious in terms of entering into this sport. So that's always really nice to see, capturing those individuals as well. In terms of ethnicity, we found that 96% of the respondents were white. 15% reported having a disability or a long-term health condition, and that is similar to the GB population. The 3 main things that were reported in terms of disability were long-term pain, chronic health condition, or a mobility issue. In terms of the age of the individuals who were using the e-mountain bikes, the majority of individuals were 45 years and above, and that really aligns with some of the other e-bike data that we've seen from the literature as well. So it appears that we are seeing older individuals using these bikes for a longer period of time. And 48% of those individuals were educated to a degree level or higher. In terms of how long they had been riding for, the survey respondents, 60% of the survey respondents had been riding a mountain bike for over a 10-year period. However, 63% had been riding an e-mountain bike for less than 2 years. So again, just really highlighting how new this sport is. We found that 61% of the respondents reported that their riding ability was of an intermediate level. And the majority of riders identified as trail riders as opposed to other disciplines, for example, enduro, downhill, cross-country. 72% of the respondents strongly or somewhat agreed that they have access to the type of trails that they want to ride on their e-mountain bikes. And really interestingly, what we saw was that over the course of different seasons, we were seeing no difference in the amount of rides individuals were doing. So they seem to be riding the same amount over the course of all different seasons, which is can be a bit challenging, as we know, within our countries. So that is me, just a quick whistle-stop tour of the riders and what we found. And now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and virtually hand over to Tracy Mosely to talk about this in terms of a rider's perspective.
Hello everyone, Tracy Mosely here. Firstly, apologies for not being with you guys at the conference today in person. I did think when I retired from racing a few years ago that life would become a little less hectic, but sadly I think as I now have a mum brain. I double booked myself this weekend, so my apologies. I know you're in capable hands with both Dan and Lesley, and they're probably going to give you a lot more exciting information than I can. But I just wanted to give you my my side of this and kind of how I turned from 20 years of racing mountain bikes from downhill to enduro to now being part of the kind of, let's say, the e-bike new wave, and what that's done for me. So I've actually now been racing an e-bike now for the last 3 years. When the first EWS E started in 2020, I was very first kind of person to be part of that race series, and I've done around every year since. So it's been a really, really interesting journey for me as well so far. And for someone who's obviously made a career out of racing bikes, it sounded like the most kind of interesting new thing with our disciplines for this time was to see, you know, what's next. E-bikes, as much as people have a divided opinion, they're certainly here to stay. And when we as human beings like something, we then want to be competitive at it. We want to try and race our mates. So racing becomes something that we do. But ultimately, there's so much more behind mountain biking than just the racing and the top level side of it. And that's what I think is really, really important with this study, is to look into to where the e-bike revolution, we could call it, is going. We know that there's, you know, a huge increase in bike sales. More and more people are having a go at e-bikes, are falling in love with it, and it's not going to disappear. So I think this study was really important for us to make sure that this new kid on the block stays, is a healthy discipline, is understood, and from a rider's perspective, to make sure that we do the best we can to make sure that it's sustainable, and is an accepted and an equal part of what mountain biking is. So apologies, not great at slideshows, and doing it remotely also seemed weird. But so what was the motivation to ride an e-bike that we found from this study? And the majority of the people, the main motivation to ride an e-bike was to have fun, was to play on their bikes, to make them feel happier. And that's something we can all aspire to, especially in this day and age. We're getting busier and busier, you know, making space for ourselves to be healthy, to be outside, to have fun, and to increase our mental health is a really, really important part of it. And interestingly, it wasn't necessarily as much about where they rode. You know, the risk was the least important motivation to ride. They weren't looking for the ultimate challenge. They were looking for more just, again, that being outside, being on forest, gravel roads, somewhere that's not technically challenging, but it's just a journey getting them outside. And that also iterates into the next point, being the social aspect of e-mountain biking was really, really important. I think it is for everyone, but particularly this study found out it's one of the main reasons that female riders posted that's why they use the e-mountain bike. And it is very much that social interaction. It does allow us to kind of bridge that gap between abilities, age, fitness. It's an incredible tool for leveling and being able to bring rides to become social. And yeah, the reason people tried e-mountain biking was very much because they hired one to start with. Often it's hard, you know, to get a second bike. Definitely cost is the main barrier, I think, to most people to owning an e-bike. So most people have hired one. They've realised what an amazing tool it is and how much fun they've had, and then they found, you know, some way of trying to be able to purchase one, or potentially get rid of their bike, and their e-bike has now become their one and only bike, because they're having fun on it. They're riding more. All of the things that we realise when you've had a go e-bike. So the next one was like, how and where do people ride? So again, from this study, people agreed that generally you'll ride further on an e-mountain bike. So 83% said they would ride further being on an e-mountain bike versus a normal bike. They tend to enjoy the technical uphills more, 79% saying that, which is certainly true. And for me, one of the, I would say, the most kind of interesting parts of this new discipline to me I've done racing downhill, I've done enduros, but actually trying to climb technically up stuff was like a new challenge, a new sport, a new skill set to learn. And something that I really, really have enjoyed, probably more than anything about the e-biking, is the technical challenge that uphills are provided. And that's obviously people out there are also finding the same thing. It does allow you to do more laps of the same trail, so you get kind of more of the fun stuff in your hour or 2 hours that you've got to do, and you can obviously ride that route faster. So again, I think time efficiency, our worlds are all becoming busier and we're more occupied with other things. Sometimes just having an hour to go out for a bike ride, you don't get far sometimes on a normal bike, whereas with the e-bike, you can feel like you've done a really good journey, and that's, I think, a really important factor as to why people are choosing to ride e-bikes. I think people also are getting a chance to challenge themselves on e-bikes. So it's saying here that, you know, riders reported riding more and improving their skill levels since owning an e-mounted bike, and that can be two reasons. One, they're actually getting out and riding more, and they don't mind trying things because they can go and repeat that section again, you know, without having the effort of trying to get back up that hill. So often you can explore more. I found myself like going, I'll go and see where this trail goes to, or I've never been here before. It doesn't matter if it's you know, it becomes a dead end road, or because you haven't got that like, I've got to ride all the way back on my own steam, I've got some help with it. So it does make you probably a little bit more inclined to go and do some adventures that you may not have done, which again gets you out there. An interesting one that e-mounted bike riders is more likely to ride in the wet, and I think again that's because it's that effort to get out the door. Sometimes when it is raining and windy and horrible and you're just thinking, I don't fancy going for a ride, knowing that the e-bike's an option, it's going to help you, you probably do it gets you that 1 foot out of the door quicker. So people are riding more in the wet. And the people in the study here believe that armoured trails are less affected than natural trails to erosion. And I think that's an area where we still have lots of research to be done in terms of the impact of e-bikes. And that's why, again, this study is really important, to make sure that we understand that impact and that information can be translated to the riders so we can make informed choices as to how we best choose to ride, where to ride, when, and try and be a really, you know, sensible and conscious mountain bike riders to what the choices we make. And on that topic, it was interesting that females were likely to avoid riding on fragile ground when it's wet and muddy, so whereas males were less likely to be concerned about that. So again, it's definitely a topic we need to be aware of if we are accessing places that are going to be affected by weather more in those kind of conditions. Then we need to, again, it's education, it's making sure the riders have an appreciation for the damage that can be done, and making informed and sensible choices around that, and riding sensibly. You know, you can ride in a manner that doesn't allow you to, you know, make as much damage by ripping up turns if you're in control of your e-bike. So that brings me on to, you know, making sure that we're responsible and we have access to training, skills, etc., to be able to make sure we ride in a way that's in control and in harmony with where we're riding. Well, the interesting thing as well, that most e-mountain bikers, they don't want to cause an issue by riding on fragile environments, unauthorised trails and footpaths. It's not in our nature to generally want to be bad. I think that's generally, most mountain bikers are, you know, cool people. They don't want to cause issues. And they also don't necessarily want to have conflict on the trails. And that's something that 11% of the people from this study had said they experienced conflict when riding their e-bike. And interesting, most were from other bikers that weren't on e-bikes. So there's definitely a really thing about education here, needing people to understand that e-bikes are, you know, they are legal, they are allowed to be on the trails, we're allowed to share them, and it's just be nice, say hi, make sure that we are really being a good person in the outdoors. You know, 10% had no awareness of outdoor access codes. Lots of new people are joining the outdoor world through e-bikes. So there's lots of education through here that people need to basically learn, and we need to enforce in some way in the future. So what we can do as riders, I think, to really help this progress is prepare well. So the education aspect, making sure that we're learning about the outdoors, outdoor knowledge, access codes, where we can and can't ride, good practice, basically. Again, skills coaching I mentioned earlier, making sure that we're able to ride the bikes and we're not getting stuck up hills and then ripping up the trail by, you know, the motor engaging without us riding. So there's lots you can do about being a really efficient and well-skilled e-bike rider. Making sure we share the trails. You know, I said again earlier that e-bikes are legal, they're allowed to be on the trails. Respect for each other, respect for other trail users, and really try and promote a positive image when you're out on your bike. You know, don't be that person that everyone thinks, oh, they were grumpy, they didn't say hello. You know, be polite, say hi. Care is my other one, making sure that we're caring for other people. So again, being prepared if there's an accident, you could help. It's always really important. Caring for our environment, making sure that our environment is still going to be here in another 50 years time. There's loads of things around that we can do, but that's an important part of being an outdoor user, making sure that we're looking for trying to make the places better. The Trash Free Trails did a really perfect one of, you know, making the place purposeful adventures, making sure you leave where you've ridden in a better place. So if there's someone else's litter, pick it up. You know, really think about where we are and enjoy the outside world that we have, and the benefits that it can bring to health is also really, I think, a huge part. And that's an e-biking in particular. It takes down that barrier of having to be fit, having to be a certain type of active outdoor person. The outdoors can now be accessed by a wide range of people, which is incredible because there's so many benefits we all know. So I think making sure that we really are advocates for our sport for the future, and being a responsible e-mountain biker is for sure going to secure the future of this sport. So please listen up. Dan and Lesley for sure are going to have much more kind of insightful facts. But from a rider, myself, and to other riders out there, this is a really important part of our job as the evolution of mountain biking. As we see a new discipline, we see e-biking's only just started on its journey as to where it's going to go. We're going to see so much development, and do your bit and making sure that we create a positive role model. That's what we all need to be, as positive role models for our sport. Thanks, guys. Hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and hopefully see you in person soon. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, Tracy. So that was a set of details there from a rider's perspective. I'll just share my screen here for the next set of slides, which is looking around the stakeholders' perspective and particularly the land manager's perspective. So I appreciate there's been a lot of activity in the comments. Hopefully some of those will be answered in the next section here. So if we think about the strategic requirements of the NGBs, particularly developing mountain biking in Scotland, this project helped meet areas across all 4 pillars, but it's primarily focused around the trails and the destinations themes that they have within that. For British Cycling, this project aligns with the core vision and the long-term aspirations of the organisation. Within the British Cycling strategy, this project supported organisational aims in around the red disc on the left called growing communities. Recreational mountain bike provision isn't particularly well resourced within British Cycling, so it's really important for them to discover more about it, and ways to support the mountain biking community is important. If we move across to the red circle at the top, cycling for everyone, albeit the study wasn't purely focused on disability or support mechanisms, but we did expect that some of the findings would identify how e-mountain bikes help those specific needs. Continuing round clockwise to work together, the blue circle on the right there, in supporting and strengthening the working relationships between the governing bodies, the forestry agencies and other land managers. Right in the centre, the green one, equipped for success, is in part about having the right knowledge and insight to make good decisions to support the sector. So as Fiona mentioned earlier, when this study started, and for much of its work, I worked at British Cycling and coordinated this project between the stakeholders and Lesley and the research team. In terms of outcomes, we have generated a whole host of resources that will go live in due course, several of which are videos themed around several aspects. We're going to show you one here in a moment, but this web page has been set up. It'll be held on the British Cycling website. It's been set up as an information repository to be openly accessible and host a report, data on an extended slide deck, and a whole set of videos around those 8 emerging themes. This particular video that we're going to show you now, it's only 90 seconds long, but it covers motivations to ride an e-mountain bike, the difference it can make for different types of people, and that everyone should welcome e-mountain bikers. So hopefully this will work. Sorry, let's go back to this. I want to share. The screen for you now.
I really got interested in e-mountain biking. I think just because it was something new as well. I've had such a kind of long career with downhill, dual slalom, cross country, and then e-mountain bikes was the new kid on the block. It was like 29er wheels, but now it's electric bikes. So that's really was the fascination, and like, what can this bring to me that's a new challenge and a new way of riding my bike? If I was to pick out three main things from this really important study, and with what I know about e-mountain biking, I think the three things would be to prepare well. Prepare is really important, to make sure that you've got everything you need to be responsible for yourself on the trail, for the weather, for getting lost, for mechanicals on the bike, just making sure you're organised. To sharing the trail with others, making sure that we're polite, we say hi, we think of other users, whether it's bikes, hikers, horses, you know, sharing our trail and our love for the outdoors, and caring about others and caring for where we're riding, to making sure that that trail is going to be there in 10 years, 20 years, and for the next generation to come. Really looking after our environment and being a responsible e-mountain biker is the future of our sport.
Okay, we should have returned back to the next slide deck now, hopefully. Lesley and Tracy have introduced the study findings from the perspective of the riders, both current and curious e-mountain bikers. Now we're just going to look at the findings of interest to the stakeholders, the land managers and so on. There were 6 key themes that emerged here. The capacity of e-mountain biking to help or hinder inclusion and diversity, including some specific gender-based insights. The infrastructure requirements, what riders like and want to ride, and other facilities that they look for as well. And lastly, the people-oriented insight around who, what and how people wish to engage and be engaged with e-mountain biking. Okay, so what sort of elements did we find with regards to inclusion, diversity and gender? Inevitably, as Lesley's been through already, there's some outputs that might be expected from the demographics in the response to the study and the general participation level. The over-indexing of male and age 45 plus riders is reflected in that data. However, due to the scale of response to the survey, which we were really pleased with, and indeed in the focus groups as well, there's a viable data from which to draw effective conclusions around female riders, around those with a disability and those with health and well-being requirements. Clearly this isn't right, and we have potential opportunities to help address this, but there's a clear underrepresentation of black and brown riders. Touched on here, but also external to this study, is emerging data and considerations to change the narrative as to what people want to do in the outdoors and the motivations to interact with it. To change that the outdoors is about escape, adrenaline and or solitude, we need to proactively match the motivations we market to the cultures and communities we're trying to attract. As a mountain bike dynamic change group, the Colour Collective have stated to their cohort of leaders who've just gone through the British Cycling Mountain Bike Leadership Scheme, if you can't see it, you need to be it. Hopefully this, amongst lots of other initiatives, will start to address the rather shocking representation figures found in the literature review, referring to inclusion and or diversity, and indeed at governance levels. In terms of specific differences between rider genders, We can see that female riders have different motivations and aspirations. Tracy mentioned those earlier. Concern over equipment weight and manageability was clear, along with their openness in seeking support, guidance and information. What this also indicates is the aspiration to be able to be independent and not reliant on others, whilst also seeking those social experiences. So let's look at some of the infrastructure elements. I think some of this data is really interesting and it may well challenge some people's expectations depending on which e-mountain bike bubble you sit in or worldview that you have. There are clear motivations for riders in where they're riding and what sort of trails they're looking for. A strong aspiration for social rides has already been mentioned, and easy to moderate trails. The media portrayed image of the rad e-mountain biker completing multiple descents fed by faster climbing in a super enduro style exists, but it is a minority. Much more apparent, as Tracy mentioned in the video, is the aspiration to ride in mixed bike groups, combining e and non-e-mountain bikes. What is clear and might be expected is that riders using e-mountain bikes to ride further and faster, both on longer routes as well as more repeat laps and throughout the year. Reflecting this information are the preferred trails to facilitate these types of rides. Trail centres emerged as the preferred location and usually on low-key routes like greens, blues and forest roads. Riders are more likely to ride throughout the year, as mentioned, and in wet conditions. There are clear requests for trails to match e-mountain bikes across their design and furniture, things like gates and barriers to be compatible with not being able to lift and manoeuvre heavy e-mountain bikes. So then we move on to the people-oriented principles here. What do people know already? What do they think they know, which we appreciate can be quite different often? And how do they want to receive information? Where information comes from is important to e-mountain bikers. They want it to be considered and reliable. So they're looking to trail centres and, interestingly, to the governing bodies as well to provide it. They most use social media and YouTube to receive it. These are often, or for the most part, not the channels that our institutions use. So there's definitely a need for structural change and some development here. One of the most interesting insights I personally found in the study was the principle of that I'm okay to do this, it's everyone else that shouldn't approach. Riders felt they knew what to do, where and when, but their perspective is that other riders don't know that or apply it. Some reflection and a level of humility might be needed amongst the e-mountain bike community here, and organisations need to strike the balance between being the fun police and actually persuasion of good behaviours with the riders. Of course, the best ambassadors for that change are riders themselves, and we're really pleased that Tracy Mosely has invested time to support this. She is very well recognised and appreciated across the mountain bike community. In terms of access codes, less than 10% really understood access codes. And whilst 83% weren't interested in riding in fragile or sensitive environments, that obviously leaves 17% who are. There was a higher proportion of riders who didn't see e-mountain bikes as causing trail erosion, yet the evidence on the ground was clear to see, and land managers certainly brought that to bear in the focus groups that they attended as well. Examples, for example, there are the technical climbs that only realistically are rideable in any volume by e-mountain bikes. Some of the mentions in the chat around chipped and chipping bikes or illegal bikes. So the study asked those questions, and 14% in fact would probably or definitely chip their bikes, which means they aren't then legal e-bikes or e-mountain bikes. 6% were still looking to do this, even though they knew it would make them illegal to ride on the public highway, on public rights of way, and on the forestry estates. Generally, riders had a tendency to indicate poor behaviour in just one or two circumstances rather than across the board. So, as Lesley most succinctly put it in a discussion we had some time ago, rider behaviours could be summed up really as generally everyone is just a little bit bad. By the same token, they're mostly very good. So in terms of outcomes and recommendations for land managers here, there are effectively 3 sets of themes to follow the themes that we've just gone through, but I'll not go through these in a great deal of detail, but to summarise, there's a need to target increased participation by underrepresented groups and to help reduce the barriers to access, such as cost. We should look to create modest numbers of charging points to overcome some of the barriers for the e-mountain bike curious and the recent adopters. Interestingly, immersed or experienced mountain bikers weren't concerned about charging points. Generally, the bike would outlast them as riders. We should make sure that trail furniture is e-mountain bike friendly and look towards creating opt-in routes within trails for e-mountain bike riders to help persuade them onto existing trails. In terms of education, we need to promote a positive image of e-mountain bike riders and reinforce the reasons why most people choose them. The social, the low-key technical routes. Oops, apologies. We need to find a positive way to promote good riding behaviours and etiquette. Everyone has something to learn, even if they're super experienced. Their actions are seen and replicated by others, so they are effectively ambassadors for the sport still. Similarly, to identify mechanisms to positively explain the negative consequences of chipping. No one really wants their bike taken away, I don't imagine. So here, this morning we've gone through a broad summary of this study. Early in the new year, the details will be released. I've seen a couple of mentions in the chat as to whether people need to be members of British Cycling. No, it'll be on the general website, open public access at this address. It's not there yet because there's some refining and launching with a comms plan that's coming out, as I say, early in the new year. So the details will be posted through the ORN network as well when it becomes available. So hopefully that's been a good insight, and I'll hand back to Fiona.
Thanks very much, Dan, Lesley and Tracy in absentia. Thanks also to all the people who've been putting in questions, making points, and now it's kind of over to the Q&As. We've got actually plenty of time for this, so here's your chance to ask whatever you want to know of Dan and Lesley, who I know are just itching to open up the study and see what they can pull out. Now, what I'm going to do, Elizabeth has kindly emailed me through all the questions rather than scrolling through on here. And so I'm going to select just a few questions that have come up, and they may end up into further discussions. And if you're comfortable doing it, if I call on you, for example, Bob Milton, I was going to come to you first. Are you comfortable enough putting on your camera and asking your question or making your point in person? Bob, are you there? I know you made a few points. well, maybe Bob's not comfortable in with the camera on, so I'm just going to ask you your question. If you do want to dip in, Bob, please let me know. You asked, I think, a number of points about the legality of e-bikes. You've asked whose job and duty is it to check that they're legal, both on open access land and highways, including rights of way. And Mark Weston has also asked what are recommendations for enforcement, following on about asking about chipped bikes. Anything you think that came out of the study that's worth adding at this point, Dan and Lesley?
Yeah, I'll dive into that. I mean, there's certainly elements around the small proportion of people who were interested in chipping their bikes. The manufacturers, one of the things that came out of the manufacturers' detail as well is that they are working really hard to prevent chipping, and because they have a duty of care, they feel a responsibility to adhere to the legal requirements. One of the challenges the UK has is that it has UK specific requirements. The requirements are different in Europe and they are different in the US. So manufacturers have to line their machines up according to where they're sold. In terms of policing it, visually, it can be pretty hard to work out if there's any difference, because someone can take a sticker off a bike, or how do you know that it's been chipped or it has a different motor on it? Visually, it's quite hard to work that out. But the question is simply, and I think Dave Liddy has responded a little bit to this, if it is compliant, then it is an electrically assisted pedal cycle and adheres to normal cycle rules. If it isn't compliant, it is not electrically assisted and it turns into a motorbike, and therefore exactly the same rules would apply to either an electric motorbike or a non-electric motorbike, in that the rider would need a motorbike license, they would need insurance, they would need to register the vehicle for vehicle excise duty. And in terms of policing it, the question you need to ask yourselves is, how would you police that if it was a motorbike?
Dan, Lesley, Mark has just added in another question here. Do manufacturers supply any information at point of sale about the illegality of use and chipping?
I don't know. Did you find anything on that, Lesley?
No, nothing. They didn't report anything. I don't think it's happening.
Okay, thanks, guys. Now, sorry, I'm going to jump about here. There's another question that's come in. Petronella, I'd actually written your name down. You'd asked a question about access codes. You've also just asked another question about terminology. Is that something you'd like to ask in person?
Sure, yes. I guess we've, within the BHS, we've had quite a lot of discussion around what an e-bike is, and how one considers that definition, particularly as horse riders have reported meeting people on bridleways riding what they claim to be e-bikes, and they're actually electrically powered motorbikes and therefore illegal on a bridleway. And I'm just thinking, as a general perceptual thing, whether a more specific term is easier, and I was just very interested to see, in fact, the term e-bike coming up in the context of this webinar, because we try to refer to EAPCs, electrically assisted pedal cycles, because it is actually a more representative term about what is permitted on a bridleway, as opposed to this confusing term e-bike, which can include a whole lot of non-permissible things. So that was really the basis of my question, because I think I'd like to hark back to an earlier question that I asked, which is in relation to the study. I'm fascinated that, you know, you've included land managers in the study, but if e-biking is something that is going to be promoted, then I think understanding of the other users' perspectives on it should be an important part of the information on which you base the next step in this. Partly, I mean, focus groups are a great way to convey information to people as well as to get information from them, and a great, you know, an opportunity to untangle possible misunderstandings, for example, about terminology. What is an e-bike? So personally, you know, my feeling about the study is great work, but there is more work to do in regard to the other users of those forest trails, who will have equal concerns about their impact on the environment that they're out there to enjoy, and the safety of their enjoyment and their interaction with other users. So yes, it was great to hear the term "be nice, say hi." That's a really good, you know, it's good that that message is continuing to permeate what we do as people enjoying the outdoors. But yes, lots to think about in this one, and I'd be very interested to hear more about the user perspective and how you're going to address that. Thanks.
I think maybe I can come in just quickly, and then Dan might come in afterwards. So I'll start off with the definition. That was one of the biggest headaches we had while conducting this study, and around the table with the stakeholders, we went back and forth talking about that. But I think we have to, and I absolutely, I fully agree with you, EPACs is the legal term of it, but I guess the users are definitely identifying with mountain bikes and e-bikes, and I think it was, there's a lot of work to really, I think, get everyone together and make sure that we are using the same terminology across the board to make that a lot clearer. You know, we just had a conversation before this meeting. There's now a discussion about what a non-electric bike should be called as well. You know, so e-bikes have only been here for what, 10 years, and we're already, we're the counterpart that they're competing with. We don't know what to call them anymore. So I do think that's quite a bit of work that it would be a really good thing for across borders, across stakeholders, for the terminology to be used and to be used consistently to make sure that everyone understands what they're talking about.
Petronella, do you want to come back in?
Yes, and just, I mean, absolutely appreciate the difficulties around terminology, but I'd put it, I know, can I suggest that the inclusion of the word pedal somewhere might actually help people to understand that if you chip presumably chipping involves modifying the bike so that the motor works when you're not pedaling. That might just be a little trickle of, you know, of concept through to people's consciousness about, you know, what is and isn't acceptable. And I mean, I'm a complete ignoramus about EAPCs, and I hadn't realised that the motor only functioned when you were pedaling. That's a very important difference. That's where I think having the word pedal in there is quite significant. As a complete you know, I am a cyclist, but I've never been on an e-bike or an EAPC.
You should definitely give one a try.
I think I should.
I know. Claire Donaldson had picked up a couple of times on, we've been talking here about e-mountain bikes, e-bikes, etc. And she's just asked, I'm still unclear the technical difference between an e-bike and a mountain bike e-bike. Now, my very simplistic understanding is basically it's, you know, the same difference between a normal analog acoustic push bike, like normal bike, and a mountain bike. I'm sure that I will get shot down in flames if that's wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's basically what the bike looks like, how the surfaces it's meant to ride. Dan?
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent.
And so a mountain bike normally would have some suspension associated with it as well, because it's going over a bumpier bit of ground. But you could cycle a bike with no suspension in these spaces as well that was an e-bike. It's just you're going to have a much bumpier ride, so you probably would prefer to have a specific e-mountain bike for some of the trails that we were looking at within this study.
Claire, you might be interested to know, I asked the question because we've got quite a lot of mountain bike trail sites that are not that far from somewhere where you might park not directly at the forest entrance. And I asked the question, I said, are people like parking further away or cycling from home on their e-bike to get to the mountain bike trails? No. It's not. You asked the question about do we have any more information about commuting, that sort of thing, and actually there's nothing came out that said, oh yes, I live in Peebles and I'm just jumping on my e-mountain bike to get to Glentress. No.
Well, yeah, so the reason I was so interested in coming to this webinar is because I teach rural tourism, and where I live in Scotland, there's been a huge surge in people doing island hopping. Yes, but I think the beginning of the presentation, there was a lot of really useful statistics about the growth, but then it kind of went on to more about mountain biking specific. So I was thinking, is that people that were already involved in mountain biking, or are more people taking up mountain biking as a result of having e-bikes? Because from a sustainability point of view, I was looking at e-bikes as a kind of people, doing a school run, going to work, just for leisure purposes, being able to explore more of wherever they live as a result of an e-bike. But that's the only reason I was asking. I wasn't sure if you could use a normal e-bike to go and do these trails. But as you say, if I just think of it as a normal bike, then I guess as a novice, you could perhaps try it until you got good. Then you would need suspension and all that other stuff that I know nothing about.
I'm going to try to be fair. I'm going to try and go further back in the questions that came in. Otherwise, we'll end up getting totally sidetracked. Sarah Walker, you asked about a trend. Is there a trend of people wanting charging points for their bikes on site? I think this also gives us a chance to, if I can just take that question and bring Dave Liddy from Natural Resources Wales in, who made a couple of absolutely mind-blowing points at the very beginning about the percentage of people using e-bikes, and that also gives the guys a chance to talk about some of the things that people were looking for on site. Dave, go on, blow us away with that again.
In terms of growth of the market sector, yeah, I hosted a meeting of the Trail Managers Forum in Wales on Monday this week, and so we've got our own NRW, Natural Resources Wales managers there, as well as people from the private sector. And so I was quoting from Rowan Sorrell, Bike Park Wales, telling me that he reckons 40% of the people rocking up at Bike Park Wales have now got an e-bike. I could barely believe what I was hearing. He says, well, a lot of, everybody's using the uplift there, and if they book for the day, they're just going to bring their bike, and quite often their bike these days happens to be an e-bike, and if they're just going out for a ride with their mates, they're just going to put it on the uplift. And so despite having fully compliant EAPCs with pedal assist that could really easily ride to the top, they just get on the uplift with all of their mates. So 40% of their traffic is now on an e-bike, which is extraordinary. Use at Bike Park Wales is something around between 70 and 90,000 riders a year visit Bike Park Wales, was my last figures I heard. And then I actually live a lot nearer to Llandegla Mountain Bike Centre, which is just in the northeastern corner of Wales, near Wrexham. And the manager there, Ian Owen, said he reckoned something like 60% were turning up at Llandegla. That's probably the most populous mountain bike centre in the country, probably the busiest. I know that just short of 20 million people, a third of the UK population, live within a 2-hour drive of Llandegla, and Ian Owen was telling me that he thought 60% of the riders who went there were now on an e-bike. As somebody who rides analog, and that's what I call them, I'm pedalling up the big uphill climb out of the mountain bike centre at Degla, and it's just like you hear the whine, you know that they're coming. And formerly, nobody used to overtake me. Now, 60% of the people just overtake me on the rising climb out there. Extraordinarily busy, and what's going on. So that's quite a big surprise. Other points for me to cover, Fiona?
First fail of the day in that. Do they have e-bike charging at either Llandegla or Bike Park Wales?
No. And that's one of the findings in the study, as we know, was that people want, when we asked what people wanted, that they really want somewhere to park, they want information about where they're going to go and what to do, and whilst there was a bit of lingering battery anxiety in riders, they were coping with that battery anxiety by doing more laps of the same thing, and we ought to be reassured by that, because that means largely if they've decided to go to a trail centre and they like trail centres, then at least that's where all of the damage is going to be focused. If we've got a fundamentally bad business model, and with a lot of cross-country mountain bike centres, I would say just charging riders to park is obviously a defective business model, because bike parks just work better because everybody's paying 30 quid a day to get on the uplift, and that'll provide you with a proper income stream to do your trails maintenance. That's something that we didn't really consider in this study.
So thanks, Dave. I think, unless Dan and Lesley wave at me if you think there's anything particularly you want to highlight, but in terms of what people are really looking for, that is going to be available in the resources on the British Cycling website quite soon. So you'll be able to find stuff out there. Again, we've still got 20 minutes to go. There were a couple of questions about funding for increased education to cyclists and mountain bikers on responsible off-road cycling on shared routes and shared spaces. Paul, my colleague Paul in the Cairngorms, also asked about funding as well for that. And sorry, the initial question was from Heather. We didn't really have any information about funding on that in the study, did we, Dan? No, Lesley? No,
there wasn't a an element of the brief that looked at funding towards e-bike use or supporting new users. I think there was a couple of mentions previously as well around commuting and utility bikes, and we specifically set the brief to look at recreational aspects of e-mountain bike use. So yeah, without a doubt, and as has been mentioned before, and Lesley alluded to, this study was very much the first of its kind. There was nothing really like it before. Inevitably, it has boundaries and limits, and some of the most interesting elements, like how we potentially support new communities to use and engage with e-mountain bikes, and various other aspects around trail wear and so on, have emerged out of the study and need further investigation. The potential for further insight and work into those is prompted really by the outcomes of this result. And Lesley, you're going to write or manage to get this published in a technical journal, I think. You're doing some work on that, aren't you?
Yeah, so obviously, being academics, we would like to start filling some of that literature that is out there and getting some of the e-mountain bike user data out there. So work in progress at the moment.
Thanks, guys. Now, there are a number of questions that have come in. I can bunch them almost up into one very wide topic. So I've got a few people. Adam Streeter-Smith, have riders changed their riding behaviour as a consequence of using an e-bike, going further, riding harder trails, riding in new locations? You've already addressed that to some extent. For example, he's mentioned upland areas. Again, Paul was highlighting things like the Cairngorm Plateau, which, I mean, it's, I don't know, 4,000 feet-ish. So that's quite hard work to get up there on a normal bike. So not quite so hard work if you're on an e-bike. Alex McLennan has talked about with the right tyres, e-bikes can potentially go into more wilderness areas, unauthorised trails, softer conditions, ride more challenging uphill terrain. Is there any data on that? And there have been a couple of questions that have come through, including on the email. Bob, and I'm sure somebody else as well, asking about Strava and the fact that there are issues arising with people going further in different locations on, I can't find the rest of Nigel's question. An issue with Strava allowing users to post routes that they're not legally allowed to use. Has anyone had any success in addressing this? And before I come to you guys, Pippa has posted a response which was about, and now I can't find the response. Natural England has had a discussion with Strava about routes posted across NNRs where there's damage occurring in route. Yeah, maybe I can bring you in on that after I get some comments on the whole kind of fragile upland areas, places that people couldn't previously get to. Yeah, what would you like to fling in about this?
So I can bring in some stats around that. Let's
Excellent.
start there,
and then
Lesley, we can move forward. So from the survey, 83% of the e-mountain bike users say they never access fragile terrains. However, accessing fragile terrains with limited or no trail path was not at all important to 64% of respondents, meaning that it was still of importance to 36% of the respondents. So that's quite I guess like a big number in terms of people who are actually accessing these areas. We looked at this data in loads of different ways. So we tried to slice and dice it to see, is there a type of user who is the more predominant type of user that would do that? From that, we found that females were more likely to definitely avoid fragile ground when riding an e-mountain bike in wet and muddy conditions in comparison to males. And they were also less likely to access fragile environments on an e-mountain bike than males. But we couldn't find anything else in terms of that user demographic. So what that suggests is that there's lots of different people that are accessing these areas. Does that answer part of that?
I think that was very interesting. We had another two questions. This is clearly a question of great import. Nigel's asking, how do you define fragile terrains? Would it include NNRs? That may depend on where you are, I suppose. Now, who else? Petronella is asking, how many of them actually know when they're in a fragile area? And I think that's possibly not just referring to e-bikes, but even more general recreational use. And increased erosion bridleway from e-bikes. What do riders, Hannah's asking, what do riders class as sensitive or fragile ground? Is there enough knowledge out there compared to what actually is fragile or easily damaged? I know we're kind of moving slightly sideways, but if we concentrate on the sort of fragile aspect in terms of understanding what is fragile.
Yeah, it goes back to those definitions. And again, this was something that as the stakeholders, we sat around the table and really went back and forwards about what are we defining by these different types of trails. So we actually, I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, I'm sorry, but I can provide them afterwards if that is useful in terms of from the questionnaire. But we actually, when we talked about fragile environments, we gave examples of what we were referring to by that, and we did that for all the different types of trails. So you know, if it was paths or bridleways or forest roads, etc., we sort of tried to classify them as much as we possibly could. But I'd be more than happy to supply that afterwards. My sieve brain can't remember all of it.
I think we
that's okay. I know there's a lot of data in there.
We have to remember and put things in perspective that the vast majority of e-mountain bike riders and respondents to the survey were looking for low-key rides, looking for social engagement. So just like in any activity or sector of society, there will be a small number of people that will be pushing the boundaries and exploring the limits of where they can go and what they can do. But we need to be really cognizant that that is only representative of the rest of society, and not get ourselves too wound up around thinking that everyone on an e-bike is irresponsible or poorly behaved or you know, detrimental to other users and so on and so forth. So that, if that helps a bit.
Fiona, shall I come in on the discussion that we had with Strava?
Please go ahead, Pip. I think that would be really interesting. Thanks.
Yeah, we had a discussion with Strava. It's been really productive because we've been looking at Strava Metro data for all sorts of reasons. And we had a chat with them about people posting routes across our national nature reserves where there wasn't a right to cycle, and where there was issues arising from that use. So we're only looking at where there is issues arising from use, not just a general we don't like Strava people posting on Strava routes across our NNRs. It's just where there are issues arising from use which doesn't have a right. And they indicated in that discussion that they were happy to look at making it not possible to post publicly. So there might be a route to the NNR, there might be a way away from the NNR, but hopefully once we've had that conversation, once a user enters the NNR on a route where they don't have a right to be, they won't be able to post publicly when they've got a time or anything or their route. We've still got to actually follow through with that. And what I can do is I can update people when we've actually followed through and did it happen and did Strava make good on what they've said they will do. But that's where we are at the moment.
Thanks, Pippa. That's great. Now we've got about 10 minutes, 10 minutes left before we really have to switch off. Nigel, you've asked a few questions, including asking fragile areas definition. You've also said, do you want to come on and ask your own question about what users are allowed to do on access land? This is, of course, where there will be slight differences between Scotland, England and Wales.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you very much.
Hi, so I work in the Shropshire Hills area of outstanding natural beauty alongside land managers, including Natural England and the National Trust. And we find that there are issues with specifically access land, and not just with e-bike users, but certainly the more inaccessible places are now becoming more used by e-bikers because they now have the facility to get to the places they couldn't get to before. One particular location I could draw attention to is an Iron Age hill fort site that has no bridle access to it at all, and is only available via footpaths, but it is access land, and I think there is a perception that as access land, anybody can use it in any way they want to use it. That might be a gross overstatement, but it just feels like that a bit. But certainly the monitoring that we've done on that particular site and the feedback we've had from other users is that it's more it's becoming more of an issue. We've also got an issue with ground nesting birds on a National Nature Reserve, which is also access land. Even though there's been sort of wardens trying to address this, they have been responded to aggressively by regular users, which is also a concern.
Yeah, I think you're right. Clearly there are some people that will either fall into the trap of not knowing, and therefore they don't understand where they can and where they shouldn't be, and there may also be the unfortunate ones who do know but ignore those elements and are overly self-interested in their own perspective. And I think there is a broader scale of responsible access communication that could be better put. I know there's been some work on the countryside code earlier this year, and from my understanding and recollection, I think they were due to narrow down or do some specific or user specific communications. I'm not sure on the timescales of those, but it would make sense at that point to look at elements that are mountain bike specific or off-road cycling specific, and do an education piece there. Certainly my time at British Cycling was spent trying to work and persuade the organisation to do a better job in those areas. But ultimately, the best people to police that are the riders themselves. And you know, we've seen that in other areas of society where unacceptable or behaviour becomes unacceptable because it's just not seen as appropriate by a large proportion of the population. So if we can find some ground somewhere and create a cohesive case to put that forward, then I think that would be my sort of approach.
Yeah, that's useful. I think the concern also, and concern voiced by other people using the site, is that the more people they see using the site inappropriately, that will kind of encourage more people to use it. I think it's very difficult to talk to mountain bikers as a group, because they don't all belong to societies or you know, even read the same publications. So that kind of more broad communications, and there's a really good point about trying to get people to make decisions about where they go before they go. What we are also finding is that we got larger groups of people who habitually go out 2 or 3 times a week, all through the year, and essentially somebody decides we're going here and nobody really questions it, because you've got this kind of group dynamic thing going on, that people just follow people, and so that it is more of a concern. But certainly, I mean, we've put signs up obviously around these sites saying that they're not for cycling, and I have to say I'm a cyclist and I'm also a mountain biker, so you know, I'm not in any way against mountain biking. I just want to see a more appropriate and responsible code of practice more generally among the people that I see cycling in the Shropshire Hills.
That was one of the key things that really came out of the study as well, was that educational piece. And when we spoke to the riders about that, it became very evident very quickly that they aren't all members of organisations. They do access this information from different things. So really what we need is that real joined up messaging that is the same regardless of if you're a manufacturer, if you're a bike shop owner, if, you know, land owner, manager, etc. I think it's a massive piece of work, but I think it's really, really important moving forward.
Yeah, I completely agree. Thank you very much for answering my question. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Nigel. Now I'm just sort of skimming over the most recent. There's some stuff about preferring trail forks to Strava, more reliable information. Petronella is asking about what's being done to get the e-bike retailers on board. We did have some bike industry partners in one lot of focus groups, and there's information about that on the resources that will be on the British Cycling website. You may not be aware, Petronella, Developing Mountain Biking Scotland had literally a leaflet that was distributed by Decathlon in a project in 2021-22. It was about the kind of getting people on their bikes, trying to teach them about the do's and don'ts. Now, that's not specific to e-bikes. That was generally about, you know, if you're buying a bike and going out and about, there's something there. There's various comments here about issues on common land, which is not a term we use in Scotland. I'm not exactly sure what that is. With no rights to cycle. In New Forest, for example, so important to influence rider choice of location before they leave home. Absolutely. Pippa, I wonder if I could call on you, just because there's this common land which I don't know anything about. If there's anything that you would like to either raise or respond about that. There's a question from Jonathan, and Bob also saying this is an issue across all 330,000 hectares of registered common land.
Well, it's an extension of the discussion of no rights to cycle on access land. Most common land also is access land. Some of it has different rights, but that very rarely, in fact, I don't know of any example which includes a right to cycle. But there is a sort of possibly a general perception that, yeah, I can take my bike on the route across the common. Whether or not that does any damage, well, that's a question for a sort of question of that would apply to any land where you're taking a bike on a path where you don't have a right. It is more of an issue in some places than others, and that's to do with the habitats rather than the rights, where just having more people potentially disturbs species that are susceptible to disturbance from people. And yes, if you've got an e-mountain bike and you go further, then the reach of people into more sensitive habitats will grow, possibly. But then if people are sticking to trail centres and going round and round the same loop, not something I'd want to do. I think that would be boring. But if that's what
I believe
people
it's
want to
about
do,
developing your skills as well,
then,
isn't it?
then that would actually make it much easier to manage them if we can manage them, because if we can manage them by putting the car park in the right place and the trails in the right place, we can attract them to non-sensitive habitats, which would be really useful.
Great, thanks for that, Pippa. Right, Kerry, could you maybe put up the final slide or two, please? That's us reached the end of our time. There is going to be a quick survey link in the chat pane, which is going to be going up about now. Oh, perfect. Thank you so much for all of this amazing interaction, the questions, the comments, everything you've put in. I'm sorry if we didn't manage to get to your question, but if there's something you feel urgently you didn't get answered, then do send it in to Elizabeth. I'm just saying this without actually consulting her, but and then we'll get that forwarded on. Nice to see you too, Alex. Yes. This will be available online very soon, and you'll get an alert from that from ORN. I think that's us for the day. Please let us have your feedback. We hope you found it useful. There's certainly tons and tons of that in there. So once the resources are available, it's well worth going on and having a rake through it. So thank you so much. We've then got the next alert is for the annual lecture of Dame Fiona Reynolds, which is just in a couple of weeks' time, 2 weeks today, if I'm not wrong. We've also got the member meeting, so do sign up for one or both of those. And look forward to seeing you then. Thank you and goodbye.